I used to like Halloween quite a lot actually, until I became a pizza delivery guy. This story actually happened a while back, before people began paying for pizza on the internet. Back then, it was much easier to play that idiotic prank where you order a pizza to a different person's home. I can't believe that stupid people actually think this is a funny thing to do. I mean, the only people it ever really hurts is the pizza delivery place, and they had nothing at all to do with the original conflict. In that vein, people really used to pull out the stops for this prank on Halloween. I was always dreading working that night because so many kids would call in false pizza orders. A couple of times, nearly 1/3 of all the deliveries that night would be jokes. On this particular Halloween, I had really been dreading going to work, but I was a sophomore in college and so I needed the money. The tips were more than ever something I really needed too. Despite my dread of wasted work, however, it turned out to be a relatively prank-free night. I worked from noon until close, which was about 11 p.m. I'd racked up a couple $100 in tips. I was about to get off shift for the night when this last-minute delivery came in. My manager was just about to tell the caller that delivery hours were over and the caller would just have to come in and pick up their pizza themselves. Unfortunately for me, I was in such a good mood at how well the day had gone, I went ahead and agreed to just go and deliver that last pizza. On my way, as typical for a Halloween story I suppose, I noticed that this house was quite off the beaten path, out on a country road. It still was fine though. The ride was creepy enough, but it was fairly enjoyable. I drove my car onto the gravel road. There were many trees on either side, and they appeared to sort of reach over and grab onto the branches, making sort of an arc. The heavy falling of leaves had just begun, and the ground was completely covered in them. It was quite a bit of a ride getting out there, but it was really quite nice scenery. When I did finally notice a house on the way, it was sort of off to the right of the road. Very typical country-style house. A small black mailbox at the end of a small gravel driveway. It seemed to be a 2-story house with a roofed front porch that had a screen door. On the top of the 3 steps that led to the porch was a traditional jack-o'-lantern. You know the kind I mean. The one with triangle eyes, a triangle nose, and the jagged 4 or 5 teeth wrapped up in a smile. I pulled into that driveway. I looked over the mailbox and confirmed that I was indeed at the right place. I hopped out of the car and heard the leaves crunching under my feet as I walked up to the porch. I saw there were only 2 lights around. One was the very dim light coming from what I assumed to be the living room, and the other was simply the jack-o'-lantern. I climbed up the stairs, and I noticed there was no doorbell, nor was there any way to knock on the door behind the screen door. I went ahead and opened it, and walked under the porch. It was extremely dark at this point, and I no longer had the light of the jack-o'-lantern in front of me to show me what was going on. Still though, I made my way over to the door. I rang the doorbell. I waited there for a while, and no one came at first. I buzzed it again and took a few more tries before the door finally opened. Standing by the side of the door somewhat behind it was what I assumed to be an old lady. They were a very tall, thin person who was wrapped in a thick crocheted shawl around their chest, shoulders, and head. I could see very little of this person because it was so dark inside. "Hey, I got your pizza right here," I told her somewhat nervously. It'll be 11:29 if you please." The lady in the shawl nodded. "Won't you come inside?" she asked me. I really did not want to do so. I hated going into anyone's house for pizza delivery, and I really did not want to go into a house like this. "Oh, it's alright, take as much time as you need, I can wait here," I nervously informed her. "Oh, but my money is in the kitchen, won't you come in please?" I really didn't want to go in there, but I thought if she was going to keep insisting that I do, I would never be able to get out of there. I started to walk into the house when the woman shut the door behind me. The old woman hobbled her way into the kitchen, and I followed nervously behind. It was hard to get a good look inside the house because there was only a single dim lamp lit inside. It had one of those very thick lampshades that blocked out most of the light as well, so the light only shone on the ceiling and floor really. This house was old, and everything in it was old as well. It was like the most stereotypical old grandma house I had ever seen. It was so stereotypical I half expected the woman to have an old wedding cake left over from the wedding where she'd been jilted, and for her to start calling me Pip or something, but I digress. As I continued further, I started to notice the whole place had this kind of musty odor that made me feel very icky and unnerved. The woman walked into the kitchen, but she didn't turn on any lights. I kept a few feet from the kitchen doorway. Sure, I was already inside, but I didn't want to walk into the pitch black with a stranger. She disappeared completely from view. Then after a moment, I saw her shadowy outline appear in a doorway. She beckoned me forward. "Won't you come in?" she whispered. She stood in the doorway and I didn't move an inch. I could barely see any of her due to the shawl and the shadows caused by the darkness. She swayed a bit in the doorway, then repeated her whispering. "Won't you come in?" It was then that I noticed something. A tiny bit of light caught a glint of metal in her hand, right by her shawl. She had what looked to be a kitchen knife in her possession. I panicked a little bit and hoped she didn't notice that I had noticed. It was so dark in the house, though, that it was very unlikely she'd seen my eyes move over. She whispered once more, beckoning. "Won't you come in?" Well, I didn't want the money then. I knew my tips would be more than enough to cover the cost of this pizza. I dropped the pizza on the floor, backed up, and was about to leave. Unfortunately, I stumbled over a hidden bump in the carpet and fell down. In complete panic, I jumped up and started sprinting for the door. I peeked back like an idiot, only to see the lady had not moved. She was still in the doorway. I got the door open and ran out onto the porch. It was then that I heard another voice, this time a man's. "Won't you come in?" I looked over, only to see there, hidden away in the dark, a man sitting on the porch in a rocking chair. He was holding the jack-o'-lantern on his lap. He was looking at me with the creepiest smile. I had no idea how long he had been there, and I really didn't care now. I shoved open the screen door, sprinted to my car, got in, and drove off. I read a lot of these stories where people call the police after and they find out the house was abandoned or something. I didn't call the police, but I did tell my boss about it. He figured it was just a Halloween prank or something. I suppose he may have been right. They seemed a bit old for that, but who knows. That woman could have easily come after me when I'd fallen over like a dumbass, but she decided not to. Either way, I'll never go back there again, and I didn't mind the joke orders after so much anymore. So I'm just gonna cut right to the chase here. I prefer scary stories where people don't give tons of backstory, but this was the creepiest thing that ever happened to me. On any given Halloween, we had a lot of trick-or-treaters during the night, and trick-or-treating was pretty much over by 8 p.m. This was back when people always did their trick-or-treating on Halloween night in the dark, before we all became wusses. Long after I'd went to bed though on this night, I heard my doorbell ring out. I woke up very groggy and looked over to the clock. It was 12:30 now. I wondered who the hell would be ringing me this late. I staggered out of bed and down the stairs. When I got to the door and opened it, I saw the weirdest thing there. A little girl, probably no more than 8 years old, wearing a fairy princess costume and a mask. She was looking down at the ground and whispered, "Trick or treat." I was confused, not only as to why this little girl was out so late, but why she thought she would still be trick-or-treating at this time. I looked at her, then looked over at the bowl on my table. I suppose there were a few mini Butterfingers left inside. Not really knowing what else to do, I grabbed one of them. Before I gave it to her though, I asked her why she was out so late alone. She didn't answer me though, just continued to look at the ground and repeated, "Trick or treat." I grabbed some candy bars and decided to give her more than usual since she was out so late. I asked her first to look up at me though. As she did so, I noticed she was wearing a goblin mask or something ugly that completely contrasted the fairy princess costume she was wearing. She held her bag up to me. I asked her again why she was out so late. As I leaned in a bit closer though to observe, she answered me, "I'm only allowed to say trick or treat." I could see in her eyes behind the mask there was a rather desperate look. I dropped the candy bars into her bag while looking around, telling her that she had to run on home. As I was observing, I noticed that there was a black RV sitting there in the street that wouldn't usually be there. After I gave the girl the candy, she lowered her head, thanked me, and ran back to the vehicle. She jumped inside the car and the car took off immediately. Not before, though, I had memorized the license plate number. I called the police immediately and told them about the suspicious thing I'd just seen. I felt like such an ass, though. The girl could have been abused or kidnapped. I really should have brought her into my house. Hell, I would have if I had seen the RV before she'd started running off. It's one of those moments I look back on over and over, and I know I did not do the right thing in this instance. I have no idea whether or not the situation turned into anything. The police took all the information, but they never contacted me about it again. I suppose I really didn't think they would. I hope that whatever was going on that night, though, that little girl, that little fairy princess, that nothing bad happened to her. I've been listening for a while and decided to share one of my own stories. This happened in the fall of 1993 when I was 20 years old. In the interest of context, this was before I started college. I was working in the material prep department of a plastics factory in the night shift. I was the only woman in that department, and my male coworkers were initially skeptical I could even handle the job. I proved myself though and earned their respect very quickly. It was surely hard work. On the plus side, it also put me in the best shape of my life though. It was also about this time that I dumped my abusive boyfriend. He was verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive as well as an alcoholic. I suppose this fact more than anything is probably why I got myself into this situation to begin with. I had just gotten off work. It was around 1:30 a.m. and my car was running on fumes. I stopped at a local gas station to fill up. While I was there pumping gas, a woman about my age approached me, looking quite nervous and scared. She told me she had been at her boyfriend's house and they'd just had a really bad fight. She walked to the gas station to use the payphone and to call a friend to come pick her up. On her way to the station though, a car pulled up as she was walking and the guys inside had started harassing her. With a slight movement of her head, she indicated a car that was parked off the side of the gas station by the dumpsters. It was a large light green car, a Caddy or a Lincoln perhaps. I could notice at least 2 or 3 shadowy figures inside. She said they had threatened her, and she was too scared to call her friend and wait. The woman was neat, well-dressed, and didn't seem high or drunk or anything like that, just really nervous and freaked out. I didn't even hesitate. I finished pumping my gas and told her to hop in my car. I'd take her home myself. At that time, on a weeknight, there was little traffic. I booked it right out of the gas station and asked her where she lived. She kept twisting around in the seat to see if the car was behind us. When I asked her to put her seatbelt on, she ignored me and kept searching for the car. I assumed she was just scared. A few blocks down on the road, however, I noticed she was looking around my car quite thoroughly, and she'd started asking me about money as well. "Where's your purse? Where's your bag? I need some money. You need to give me some money." My stomach sank. I had this woman in my car now, and for sure she was gonna rob me. Fuck. When I thought about it though, robbery just didn't make much sense. I was driving a 1985 Chevette, affectionately nicknamed the Shitbox, and was wearing my ratty work clothes as well. I did not look like a person with a lot of cash, primarily because I was not a person with a lot of cash. At this point, she twisted around in the seat and started yelling, "There they are! There they are!" She didn't sound scared anymore though. I checked in the rear view, and sure enough, that car was following right behind me. She started to cackle and began bouncing up and down in the seat excitedly. "My boys are gonna fuck you up, bitch. They're gonna fuck you up." Now she was laughing like crazy, opening the glove box, looking in the back for a bag or purse, telling me all the messed up shit these guys were going to do to me. Now, if I had been smart, I would have just driven to the police station. Actually, if I'd been very smart, I would have called the cops from the gas station and waited with her until they arrived. That would have been the intelligent thing to do. Unfortunately, none of this crossed my mind until much later. In the moment, I just got really fucking angry, and I realized 3 key things all at once. 1, there was an intersection just up ahead, with cars waiting on either side to cross, and the light had just turned yellow. 2, I had a spare box cutter that I kept for work in the driver's side door compartment. And 3, this crazy-ass bitch still hadn't put on her seatbelt yet. I didn't think. I floored it and soared under that yellow light, just as it turned red. I glanced back to see if the green car was still behind me, but the cross-traffic at the intersection had started to move. Now they couldn't catch up. The bitch started yelling. I slammed on the brakes, and she hit the dash and windshield with a solid and viciously satisfying crack. She rebounded back to the passenger seat. I had the box cutter in her face now, and I was screaming some seriously batshit crazy stuff. I was so mad I don't even remember exactly what I said. Something along the lines of "get the fuck out of my car before I cut off your face and make you eat it, bitch." The crazy screaming and box cutter combo seemed to work. She grabbed blindly at the handle in a panic and threw the door open. I started shoving and punching her until she tumbled out the door into the curb. I stomped on the gas, got to the next turn, and squealed around it with the passenger door still open. I made a few more turns because I was afraid the green car might catch up to me. After a while though, I stopped to close the passenger door. Then I cut across town and got on the highway to go home. I was on the highway for 5 minutes before the shakes started. I pulled off to the shoulder to calm down a bit and get my shit together. Then I drove home. I told my older sister everything that happened. She wrapped me in a tight bear hug while simultaneously yelling about how stupid I was for not going to the police at first. I've never been so glad to be yelled at in my life. My story involves myself and 3 of my really good friends throughout my whole childhood. We'll have them go by Kevin, Ryan, and Tommy. I'm still friends with them to this day. This story you're about to hear is true and not fabricated in any way. Regardless of whether we were just seeing things or whatever really happened, the reality is we had experienced something very horrifying this night in my friend Kevin's cabin. During the mid-summer times, usually around the middle of July, me and a couple of my good friends who I previously mentioned would always make time to go up to my friend's family cabin way up north in the forests of Minnesota, located on Vermilion Lake. Throughout all of our young years, we would always go, for sure accompanied by my friend's dad, who owned that particular cabin. Sometimes some of our other dads as well. Once we were juniors in high school though, we felt mature and old enough to just go on our own, finally without Kevin's dad or any other adult supervision that may have wanted to accompany us. I would like to mention a little information in regards to my friend's cabin to help you picture the scenario better. It was situated in a very remote location and was fairly small based upon the very large-sized island. Other cabins were there as well, but the next one closest to us was a solid half a mile away at least. You could get to it by taking a man-made path around the island, but there was no driving or anything like that. I want to mention that to get to my friend's cabin, he had to park on a gravel road on the opposite side of the island. As his cabin was located on a little inlet, he had to take his boat across the lake a half a mile to reach it. My mind always had a tendency to run around when sleeping there at night. It was one level with only 2 bedrooms next to one another, a kitchen and living room connected, and a bathroom in the back of the cabin. Where you slept, there was always at least one window in each room, with no curtains at all. It was very easy to look outside into the woods and out to the lake. This is where my mind would run as I always thought somebody would peer over the window and look in. Of course, nobody ever really did. I had been to this cabin a dozen times throughout my lifespan, and nothing creepy had ever happened, so the older I got, the easier it got to sleep there. We would usually stay about a week's worth, 4 or 5 nights. On the 3rd night during the trip, when we were there on our own, we had set up a campfire and been drinking beer all night. Not saying I condone underage drinking, by the way, we just happened to sneak some in, being the rebels we were. We went out to his dock to gaze up at the magnificent stars and enjoy our buzz. All of a sudden, though, we heard something out in the water. It sounded kind of like something jumping out to catch a bug or something. We quickly peeked out at the lake with curiosity, wondering where that splash could have come from. While we were out there, we had our poles ready 24/7. Thankfully, the moon was out that night, which helped to light up the lake. Otherwise, it would have been dark as black. With there being no lights for miles upon miles, we wouldn't have been able to see anything out there. My one friend Ryan began to squint and look closer, before pointing and saying, what the fuck is that? I looked a bit closer. I finally spotted what he was pointing at. All I can describe it as is it looked like someone's head was peeking out of the middle of the lake, just floating there, staring at us. It was about 3/4 of a football field out in the lake from the dock. As I looked closer, there was no question. I could make out features even. Long black hair, palish skin like a face. I couldn't make out the eyes, nose, mouth, or chin. It was like a blob of pale skin with long black hair covering it. How was this possible? I never forgot the feeling that came over me in that moment. The hairs on my legs, neck, and arms all stood up, and I was paralyzed, ready to leave in that instant. We told ourselves, though, we were just drinking. Just a loon, perhaps. These birds were very popular night drifters on the lake and did their hunting quite late. They also have black with some white colors on their coats as well, and hunt by diving deep into the water. It was possible, when our drunken state, a loon had popped up in the water after hunting for a bit. At least, we tried to talk ourselves into that scenario. All of us continued watching with serious creeps, noticing the figure was not moving one bit, just sort of treading water in one place. We went back to the campfire, lit it even brighter, and headed inside to drink more. We soon forgot about that weird experience with the help of more alcohol, until I had to use the bathroom real bad. The one inside was preoccupied. I went outside to do my business, since we were in the great outdoors. I had been taking a piss and glancing out at the beautiful moonlit lake when I noticed that black object was still there, only now it was much closer. It still looked as if it was a person staring right at me. I could easily now make out what looked to be a nose. Again, this figure was very pale, like they hadn't seen the sun for years. A very, very uneasy feeling came over me. I immediately went inside and told my other friends to come look quick, keeping my eyes glued to it even to the door at the cabin. I came outside to see this figure still there, looking at us as if this head was corked up at us with its chin in the air. Nobody dared to go down to the dock anymore. We went back inside, ruling out that it probably was not a loon. A loon would never tread the water so long in the same spot. This object was like stiff as a board, not moving a single muscle, just staring up at us from the deck instead. There was no ripple effect in the lake either from the object. We thought about it for a bit and decided it must have been a log with some weeds on it or something. I could tell everyone felt very uneasy though. A few hours passed by. It was now super late into the night at this point, and we knew we needed some sleep. Being my curious self, I looked back one more time now, and the object had completely vanished. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, thinking it really must have just been a log or something that floated in and slammed into the shore now. We slept with the windows open that night. There was no AC in this cabin. We had them open or we would fry inside. Me and my other buddy Tommy slept in the living room, while my 2 other friends slept in the 2 separate bedrooms with their doors open. Not being able to sleep but keeping my eyes peeled shut, I began to hear what sounded like someone walking around at the bottom of the stairs to the cabin. I thought I was about to shit bricks. No question what or whoever I had heard down there was at the dock now, pacing back and forth as they made the sound of boots clicking on the wood. It was as if they weren't sure what to do themselves. It lasted for about 3 minutes. I wanted to whisper to my buddy, but I was frozen in fear. I kept my eyes shut and my ears on full alert. The footsteps sounded like they'd just begun to ascend the stairs. Then all of a sudden they turned around, and it sounded like they were sprinting out down the man-made path. After the sound of the steps were long gone, and a couple of minutes had passed by, I woke Tommy up, asking if he'd heard the same thing. I was startled when my friend Ryan rushed out of his room and said we needed to leave right now. Something was very disturbing about his expression as well. I asked him why. He woke up my other friend Kevin in the other room and said we needed to go right now. I asked him to explain. He told us while grabbing his stuff that when he was turning sides in his bed trying to get more comfortable, he'd happened to peek over and seen someone looking in at the top right corner of his window, then quickly shift out of view. He told me all he'd seen was a single eye, ghostly white skin, and black long hair going down out of sight. This window was very high up. This person was either standing on an object peeking in, or they must have been floating or something. Ryan continued to say, "Let's fucking go right now," very seriously. It disturbed the fuck out of me. I was feeling like I was going to be sick. Rather than telling them what my friend and I had heard in the living room, we all just agreed to pack our stuff and book it right now, not cleaning the cabin or anything. We did lock up as we headed down the stairs, and we could see bare footprints in the dirt, heading off into the path and all around the cabin. We picked up our step at this point, jumping into the boat. We threw our stuff in as well, untied it, and sped off. I was too scared to even think about that thing we'd seen in the water anymore. I couldn't even bring myself to look into the lake. My eyes were glued to the island, trying to spot anything moving. I saw nothing. When we had finally gotten our stuff packed in the car and the boat tied up as well, we hopped in and took off. We had been driving about 10 miles now, when out of the blue, Ryan broke down in the car sobbing. "What was that, guys? What the fuck did I see?" We called our parents and explained what happened on the way back. Ryan was freaking out. They told us to just get home safely and quickly. It was about 4 or 5 in the morning now, but no one could sleep. It was a very quiet and somber ride home. My friend's dad went up the next weekend and said he experienced nothing like that while there. He did mention, though, that there were more bare footprints lingering about, which he thought was odd because someone was walking around his property, which really bugged him. Whatever my one friend had really seen in the window hit him really hard. He had a real breakdown and had trouble sleeping multiple nights. He ended up having to seek professional help for a couple of weeks and even hop on some sleeping medicine. As time went on, he ended up being fine, but he's still uncomfortable sleeping next to a window without a curtain. To this day, I can't explain what we saw or what seemed to happen to us. I don't know what that was at the lake or what Ryan saw in his window. Nothing ever happened at the cabin since that night besides the additional footprints. We were told from my friend's dad who owns it that it really could have been anything. I personally decided to never go back. That really makes me sad though, because I had a lot of great childhood memories there. Tommy and Kevin have both gone back and been fine, but Ryan absolutely refuses to even look at the thing. A lot of people have cabins on this island, so I suppose it could have been a prank in the makings that had been busted when Ryan saw the person at the window, or possibly a person wanting to do something worse. I'll never be able to explain what that was in the lake, but the fact that this incident, along with bare feet and someone looking in at Ryan at night, all happened in the same night, seems like much more than just a coincidence.